My life changed forever when I spent $3,600 for a small fixer-upper in rural Illinois. My name is Amanda, and I'm 28 years old. My parents expected me to donate $3,000 toward my sister Jessica's $5,000 California health getaway. Instead, my mother's face twisted in anger when I told her about my house purchase. "To us, you're dead." My sister and father stared silently in agreement as she yelled. Years of being the family's afterthought in comparison to my golden child sister were cemented in that moment. Please leave a comment below letting me know where you're watching from if you've ever had to choose yourself above unjust familial expectations. In order to accompany me on this path of self-discovery, click the subscribe button. My sister and I never felt like we shared the same middle-class lifestyle while we were growing up in suburban Chicago. Both of our parents, Richard and Margaret Wilson, had respectable jobs. Mom was an administrative assistant at the local high school, and Dad was a sales manager at an office supply company. They gave us pleasant lives, but for me in particular, comfort had conditions. 3 years older than I was, Jessica was always the focal point of our family's constellation. While my accomplishments were inevitably acknowledged, hers were celebrated with lavish celebrations. Because Jessica had recently been accepted to a summer internship, my parents showed her more attention than I did on my 16th birthday. My parents ordered champagne for the grown-ups to congratulate her achievements, and my birthday meal became a celebration of her achievement. It hardly merited mentioning my new driver's license. Jessica's sensitivity has always been higher. Every time I asked Mom why the difference, she would explain. For her to flourish, she needs additional support. In the meantime, I was referred to as the independent or pragmatic one, code for the independent person or the one we don't have to care about. Throughout our childhood, this trend continued. My parents paid a high-priced tutor to help Jessica with her calculus difficulties. They advised me to start a study group with classmates when I needed assistance in French. They made it happen for Jessica to go to a volleyball camp that cost $2,000. They grumbled about the $300 trip cost when I made it to the national debating competition. As we grew older, the disparity in income became even more noticeable. At a private institution, Jessica majored in communications, but she changed her focus 3 times before she graduated. Her apartment's food plan and expenses were paid for by my parents. I worked 30 hours a week between a campus job and a weekend retail job while attending a state accounting school, and I still graduated with student loans. Jessica was like a pinball bouncing between different employment routes after graduation. She began her career with a public relations business, but left after 6 months due to the very corporate atmosphere. After that, she became a yoga instructor for a while until she discovered that teaching 5 classes a day was physically taxing. She then tried food blogging, but gave it up when she realized it was hard to make money from it. Every career transition came with costs, certificates, tools, and website designs that inexplicably turned into urgent family financial crises that needed to be resolved right now. Your sister is searching for her way. When I question these bailouts, we need to support her journey, Dad would remark. In order to pay off my student loans early, I worked 60-hour weeks at an accounting firm and also worked part-time as a bookkeeper for nearby companies. By the age of 28, I had saved about $20,000 and paid off my debt. In the current economy, this is no small effort. Rachel, my roommate, recently revealed that she was engaged and would be moving in with her fiancé. We shared a small apartment. This implied that I would have to locate a new roommate or double my rent. With Chicago rental costs continuing to rise above affordable levels, neither choice seems enticing. I came onto what appeared to be an error one evening while looking through real estate listings out of curiosity rather than serious intent. A 600-square-foot home in Millfield, a small town 2 hours from Chicago, is advertised for $3,600. The listing's awful images of a glaringly decaying building explained the extremely low price. The former owner had abandoned the property, therefore it was being sold at a tax auction. Rachel looked over my shoulder at my laptop screen and exclaimed, "This can't be real!" That is less than the security deposits of most people. Most likely it's a hoax. I nodded, but I couldn't help but email the county office that was in charge of the auction out of curiosity. The following morning, I was surprised to receive a response verifying the authenticity of the listing. The official clarified that due to their location and state, ultra-cheap properties were frequently found in rural areas and were not desired by anyone. This specific home needed extensive renovations to be livable, had been unoccupied for years, and lacked functional utilities. It would have discouraged most people. I found it fascinating. Amy, the accountant, started weighing potential value against expenses right away. Even if I invested $15,000 in remodeling, for less than $20,000, I would still be able to afford a mortgage-free home. In Chicago, a little portion of a down payment. I took a car out to Millfield that weekend to have a closer look at the property. Something about the small house appealed to me, even though the listing photographs weren't deceptive about its state. I stood in the overgrown yard and failed to notice the broken windows or the sagging porch. I saw potential. I witnessed liberty. When I first entered my possible new house, I had to be careful not to trip over rotten floorboards. The real estate salesperson repeatedly apologized for the state of the property, as if startled that anyone had come to see it. As she carefully tested each step on the creaky porch, she revealed that it had been unoccupied for almost 7 years. His children reside out of state, and the former owner passed away. The county confiscated it at $652, as they never showed up to claim it or pay the property taxes. It was a small house by any measure. It had a tiny living area, a kitchen with antiquated appliances, a bedroom, and a bathroom with fixtures that may have been added during Nixon's presidency. It was roughly the size of a one-bedroom apartment. There were at least 3 leaks in the roof, which resulted in water damage to the walls and ceiling. The agent cautioned that the wood-burning stove in the living room might not be up to code, and there was no central air conditioning or heating. As she watched me examine a window frame that had partially detached from the wall, she remarked, "Most people who buy these properties just bulldoze them and start fresh." However, neither my budget nor my plans called for bulldozing. The house had good bones, the foundation looked sturdy, and the frame was undamaged despite its sad state. Both the plumbing and the electrical wiring would require total replacement, but both issues were fixable. This house was especially attractive because it was situated on a whole acre of ground on the outskirts of Millfield, which has a population of 837. There was a cornfield behind the property, and a little creek ran alongside it. Although the closest neighbor could be seen, they were too far away to hear casual talk. The seclusion felt opulent after years of living in flats in Chicago with strangers. Although small Millfield was not a barren place, it had a hardware store, a grocery store, a diner, and even a tiny library. Most significantly, it offered fast internet, essential because I intend to eventually discuss remote employment with my company. The procedure for the auction was surprisingly simple. I made the required minimum bid of $3,600 after conducting my due diligence, looking for lanes on the land, and making sure the title was free of legal problems. Nobody else placed a bid. I suddenly became the owner of a home. My pals believed I had gone insane. My colleagues were perplexed. You will live in a house without running water and 2 hours from civilization. When I showed my cubicle mate pictures, he queried incredulously, but I had a vision that others were unable to see. During college, I had devoted numerous hours to viewing YouTube videos about renovations. Although I had spent summers working as a bookkeeper for the construction company, I had frequently watched the crews in action. I had even attended a couple weekend courses on basic house maintenance at the neighborhood hardware store. As befitted my training in accounting, my plan was methodical. I would start by making the house weatherproof by repairing the windows, roof, and external walls. After that, I would take care of the interior structural problems by replacing the damaged wall studs and floor joists. The heating, plumbing, and electrical systems would follow. Lastly, I would take care of the fixtures, flooring, and drywall. I made a thorough spreadsheet that broke out the estimated expenses, and the materials for roof repair came to $2,000. I intend to use YouTube tutorials to assist me in doing the work myself. $500 for supplies and lumber and structural repairs. $500 for an electrical system. I need this $2,000 plumbing done by an expert. $800 for a tiny split system's heating and cooling is another expert task. $1,200 for doors and windows. $800 for insulation, $1,500 for flooring and drywall, $200 for bathroom and kitchen fixtures, $1,500 for contingencies and other expenses. Complete $16,000, almost all of my savings. However, I would end up with a paid-off house that would be worth a lot more than I had invested. Although it was ambitious, my schedule was doable. During the week, I would still live and work in Chicago, but every Friday night, I would drive to Millfield to finish the house until Sunday. To make the property livable, I calculated that it would take roughly 8 months of weekends. Meanwhile, when the weather allowed, I would spend work weekends sleeping in a tent on the property. Otherwise, I would sleep in my car. My vision improved with each visit to the facility. I pictured having coffee in the morning on the porch with a view of the creek. In the side yard, I imagined a tiny vegetable garden. I imagined reading by the wood stove in peaceful evenings. This small, dilapidated house was what I sorely desired after years of living up to the standards and expectations of others. A life that was mine and mine alone, constructed by hand. While on a video conversation with my friend Rachel, I made a virtual tour of the property for her. She politely remarked, "It's definitely rustic," as I showed her the bathroom with its mystery stains and fractured sink. "It's a catastrophe." I chuckled. "It won't last long, though. When you originally informed me about this area, I must say that I didn't understand," Rachel stated. "But now that you're so excited, it makes sense. You have a blank canvas here. It was precisely that. I would discover myself by creating something material, something that would value and appreciate rather than vanish like workshop wisdom." Whereas Jessica had spent years searching for herself through pricey programs and retreats. I did extensive research on Millfield before putting all of my effort into my strategy. The town's population had grown somewhat in recent years as living in the country became more feasible due to remote jobs. The value of real estate had risen gradually, if not significantly. The small school was well regarded and had a low crime rate. My ambition to someday work remotely seems less uncommon because many of the inhabitants commuted to larger towns for employment. My confidence in my choice grew as I gained more knowledge. This purchase was not made on a whim. It was a well-thought-out investment in my future that would yield an asset that would appreciate in value over time and release me from the rental market. It would only take perseverance, hard effort, and a readiness to temporarily forego some conveniences. The family dinner that turned everything around took place on a Sunday night in late April, but I didn't account for how my family would respond to my choice, especially when it conflicted with their expectations that I would once more open my wallet to finance Jessica's most recent self-improvement endeavor. Dad had opened a pricey bottle of Cabernet, and Mom had prepared her famous pot roast, Jessica's favorite. I should have been able to spot the telltale indicators of a planned special lunch. Excellent wine, and everyone is being remarkably kind to one another. Usually, these components come before a request for funding. Jessica's appearance had changed since Christmas. She switched out her typical makeup for a bare-faced look that she said honored my true nature, and her regularly enhanced blonde hair turned its natural brown. She was dressed in loose linen and a beige color that she said was actually earth mud. As a mother, Jessica declared, "I've been experiencing these terrible headaches and exhaustion." Serve the roast. My holistic nutritionist believes I have adrenal exhaustion and an inflammatory reaction to environmental pollutants, but my doctor and testing revealed nothing medically wrong. Mom made empathetic noises as Todd gave a solemn nod. I concentrated on slicing my meat. I've heard this conversation in several forms before. Jessica found a new health issue every few months that needed costly insurance-uncovered attention. Mom remarked, "That sounds serious." What is advised by your dietitian, Jessica's expression lightened. That's the topic I wanted to discuss. She informed me about Serenity Springs, a fantastic wellness retreat in Northern California. Personalized cleansing, stress management, dietary reprogramming, and spiritual alignment are all part of this special program. "That sounds thorough," Dodd said. Jessica's wine glass was refilled, which didn't seem to fit with a detoxification regimen. However, I didn't share that insight. "It's transformative," Jessica added. "Do you recall my yoga certification training with Alexis?" She returned from her trip last year entirely changed. Now earning 6 figures, she owns her own wellness coaching firm. I refrained from speaking. Jessica had a tendency to know individuals that had amazing outcomes from whichever program she was interested in at the time. However, she never seemed to get the same results from these same programs. What is the duration of this retreat? Sincerely intrigued as to what justified the unavoidably high price tag, I asked. Jessica answered defensively, "It's a full week of intensive healing. The professionals are well known throughout the world. The chef has prepared meals for royalty and celebrities. To guarantee individualized attention, they only allow 12 people to attend." "It sounds exclusive," I made a neutral comment. "Yes," Jessica said. "That's why their last-minute cancellation is such a fantastic chance. If I can get the money together, I can take the position in 3 weeks." It was there. The dinner's objective. "What is the price of anything like that?" Dad inquired, but I had a feeling he already knew. Jessica inhaled deeply. "The weekly cost comes to $600. All meals, lodging, and therapy sessions are covered by this." My water almost swallowed me. That was more than the total cost of my house, plus the materials I needed for 2 months of renovations. "However, it's an investment in my future and well-being," Jessica added hastily. Alexis claims that the contacts she established during the retreat were the main reason her business took off. "Do you want to become a health coach right now?" Some of the participants are very successful business owners seeking wellness coaches. Recalling her prior passion for event planning, which had lasted for about 3 months, I inquired. Jessica remarked somewhat irritably, "I've been going in this direction for a while. This is the culmination of my meditation practice, yoga training, and nutrition certification. My practice would become more unified as a result of the retreat." Mom and Dad shared one of those glances that held a whole discourse that no one else could see. Mom remarked, "We think this could be really good for you, honey, for your professional path as well as your health. It's a big amount on short notice, but we'd want to help at it. We are able to give $2,000 to it." Jessica's face drooped a little, but she got back up fast. "That's really kind. Thank you." The 3 of them then turned to face me. When I recognized what was happening, the stillness dragged uneasily. "Amanda!" Finally, Jessica said, adopting the soft tone she used when attempting to convince someone. "I'm aware of how adept you are with money." "You're always responsible and saving," she replied. Being responsible was more of a slightly fascinating pastime than a life decision. I was hoping that you might assist me with the precise sum of $3,600 I mean, for my residy. It was a near cosmic coincidence. Right now, I don't have that type of money. I said, being careful not to bring up my most recent acquisition. I wasn't yet prepared to break the news. Not when I knew it would be criticized instead of celebrated. Mom said, "But you're always saving. You must have a contingency plan in place." I said, "This isn't exactly an emergency. This retreat is voluntary. It's for your health." This could be the chance that finally puts her on a steady path, her career mom remarked, countering his tone that suggested he believed I was being purposefully obtuse. Jessica touched my hand from the other side of the table. "I realize this is a lot to ask, but once my coaching business succeeds, I will repay you. Consider it an investment in a family company." I pulled my hand away, uncomfortable with the manipulation of emotions. I must give it some thought. Even as I spoke, I knew that the answer I would give would be negative. Tensions boiled beneath courteous talk for the remainder of the meal. Jessica went into great detail about the retreat's facilities, daily massages, individual cabins with organic linen, and customized diet plans according to astrological signs and blood types. I became increasingly convinced with each detail that this was just another costly whim that would not result in any long-term change. That night when I drove home, my mind was a battlefield of opposing feelings. The old sense of guilt that I was somehow wrong for not putting Jessica's demands ahead of my own pulled at me. Under the guilt simmered anger, bitterness about being handled more like a personal bank than a sister. And there was a stronger resolve hidden beneath each of those emotions. This pattern needed to be broken. My home symbolized my opportunity to create a life according to my own standards. I refused to give up the chance to finance yet another of Jessica's fleeting aspirations. My dreams would come first for once. I brought a folder with pictures of my new home and early renovation plans to my parents' place the following Sunday. Throughout the week, I had gathered contractor quotations, looked up Millfield building codes, and made a thorough work schedule. I was eager to show my family my project in the hopes that they would finally see I was creating something worthwhile. My mood briefly improved because Mom had prepared my favorite dish, lasagna. When everyone was seated, I remarked, "I have some news I'd like to share." Maybe they would have sensed my hesitancy regarding Jessica's departure and wanted to make amends before we ate. "We also have news," Jessica said, virtually jumping in her chair. "However you go first." I put the first picture on the table after opening my folder, an image of me standing proudly on the ramshackle porch of my modest house. I declared that I had purchased a home, not being able to contain my smile. It's mine, even though it's tiny and requires a lot of work. Clear and unrestricted, no mortgage. My news was met with silence. Mom picked up the picture and looked at it with a grimace. At last, she responded, "This isn't a house. It's a shed. It is 600 square feet. Although it is officially a single-family home, I clarified that it is little. It has a living space, kitchen, bathroom, and bedroom. Where is this location?" As he took the picture for Mom, Dad inquired. Millfield is a community approximately 2 hours away from Chicago. Despite being rural, it has all the necessities, and as more remote workers relocate to the 2-hour drive-away, property values are beginning to rise. Mom was horrified. "You live so far away from civilization, but why would you want to?" "That's not barbaric," I said defensively. "It's just quiet and little, and I won't be relocating there right away. While I'm still working in Chicago, I'll be remodeling it on the weekends. For this project, how much did you pay?" Dad inquired, sounding as though he believed I had been duped. $3,600, I said, closely observing their responses. Jessica let out a gasp. "That isn't feasible." "Not for rural properties that require major renovations," I clarified. "It was left for years before being sold in a tax auction. Even with the additional $15,000 I'll need to spend on improvements, I'll still be able to buy a house for less than $20,000. My parents exchanged worried looks instead of the congrats I had hoped for. "Have you had this property thoroughly inspected?" Amanda Mom asked in a childlike voice. "It may be a financial trap. There may be structural problems, asbestos, and black mold. I have done my homework." I paused and produced the inspection report that I had ordered. "It does need some work, but nothing that cannot be resolved with good preparation. The frame is undamaged, and the foundation is sturdy." "However, why would you choose to live in a remote area?" Jessica inquired. She wrinkled her nose in disgust. "No good yoga studios or restaurants can exist. Your desires may not be shared by others." I answered, trying not to sound irritated. "I want financial independence, privacy, and space." Talking about money was interspersed. "Have you given your sister's retreat expenses greater consideration?" And there it was, the true cause of their lackluster reaction to my news. Their assumption that I would pay for Jessica's retreat was squarely at odds with my decision to buy a house. As I mentioned carefully, I don't currently have the extra money because of when I bought my house. I've set aside all of my leftover funds for important remodeling projects. "Rather than assisting your sister, you chose to spend your money on this shack." Mom had raised the pitch of her voice. "I invested my money in a future-oriented venture. I made the correction. As I make improvements to the house, its value will increase." Dad retorted that Jessica's retreat is an investment in her health and future. "Indeed!" Jessica jumped right in. "And after the retreat, when my wellness coaching business takes off, I reimburse you." I inhaled deeply. "In the past 5 years, Jessica, how many different job options have you tried? And how many times have I or my parents contributed to the funding of those endeavors? Has that investment paid off in any way?" Jessica's cheeks turned red. "It's unfair. At the expense of everyone else, I have been figuring out my own way." Before I could stop them, I said the words that were slipping out. Amanda Mom lost her temper. "Express regret to your sister For what purpose stating the facts? Every dollar I've saved has been earned via tremendous effort. I paid for college on my own. In order to pay off my college loans early, I worked several jobs. I have never requested financial assistance from any of you. Not once. This family has given Jessica tens of thousands of cash, yet she has nothing to show for it. We help one another out in this household. Seriously, Dad said. Families act in this way. No. I retorted. You back Jessica. I provide for myself. Apparently, I'm also supposed to stand with Jessica. You're being self-centered, Mom said. You're spending your money on a fantasy game of home in the woods, while your sister has a genuine opportunity here. My home is not a dream, I said, reassembling my papers and pictures in the folder. It is a material possession that will give me stability in my finances. Jessica's retreat is a $5,000 getaway that is being passed off as a professional advancement. Tears clouded Jessica's eyes. It's unbelievable that you have such a low opinion of me. For me, this retreat has the power to transform everything. The yoga certification was supposed to make all the difference, or the pottery studio membership, the event planning company, or the culinary blog. That's sufficient. Mom made the silverware jump when she slapped her hand on the table. I won't allow you to disparage your sister's goals. But what about my goals? Suddenly reluctant to give in as I always did, I demanded, why specifically did she decide to pursue her ambition of becoming a wellness coach after just one week-long retreat? More legitimate than my aspiration to become a homeowner, because she has a real chance to retreat. Your house project is just you avoiding responsibility, Dad stated. Accountability. I gave an incredulous laugh. In this room, I am the most responsible individual. I am the only one who makes plans for the future and lives within my means. How does that constitute evading accountability? Your duty to your family. Mom's voice became clearer. Which you're obviously giving up for this self-centered endeavor, I say. Investing in oneself is not selfish. Silently, I said, all my life I've seen you put Jessica's desires ahead of my own. I'm selecting myself for once. Mom's voice rose with each syllable. Well, maybe you should just go live there now if that dilapidated shack is more important to you than your sister's well-being. In fact, you can consider yourself no longer a member of this family if you leave without committing to assist Jessica. Margaret, Dad said. The ultimatum made him look uneasy. No, Richard. Mom interrupted him. I'm sick of her self-centered behavior. What specifically have you done for me after all that we have done for her? I caused a lifetime of repressed anger to suddenly flare up. Have you ever prioritized my needs before? Have you ever acknowledged my accomplishments the way you honor Jessica's merest endeavors? You girls have always been treated equally by us. Dad made a feeble protest. You're aware that's a falsehood, I said, getting to my feet. I've always been an afterthought, and Jessica has always been the golden child. My eagerness to fix other people's problems, especially financial ones, is the only quality you've ever appreciated in me. You have no right to address us in this manner. Mom stood up and hissed. After everything we've given up for you, give an example of a sacrifice you've made just for me. I posed a challenge. Only one. The ensuing hush was deafening. I gathered the packet of house documents and my handbag and said, that's what I thought. I will now depart before we say something that cannot be undone. If you depart right away without consenting to assist your sister, Mom said in a shaky, angry voice. In that case, you are dead to us. The words struck me like a physical blow and I froze. I had anticipated disappointment rage and perhaps emotional blackmail. Not this, though. Not a complete rejection, Mom. Jessica let out a gasp, perhaps taken aback by the gravity of the command. I glanced at my father in the hopes that he would step in, but he simply gazed at his plate. My mother's words were just as devastating as his silence. I'm sorry that's how you feel, I remarked finally, and was taken aback by how steady my voice was, even as I was about to cry. However, I will no longer burn myself alive to keep Jessica warm. Jessica called after me as I made my way to the door. Please, Amanda, you're going overboard. We can resolve this. I made one final turnaround. Nothing needs to be worked out. I won't give you $3,600, so listen to me, Mom. The precise sum I spent on my home. We won't have anything else to talk about if you can't see how twisted up that is. I left and got into my car, but it wasn't until I was a block away that I stopped and started crying. I wept for the family I believed I had, for the affection that had always been conditional on my obedience, and for the acceptance I would never get. I sobbed until my throat hurt and my eyes burned. I then restarted the vehicle and went for a drive. I went straight to my house in Millfield instead of returning to my apartment, to the future that I was creating for myself, whether or not my family approved of it. I woke up in my automobile parked outside my rundown house the morning after the altercation with my family. I drove through the night on a combination of grief rage and adrenaline. I cried myself to sleep in the reclined driver's seat and arrived at Millfield well after midnight. I woke up stiff, emotionally spent, and momentarily confused. As I gazed at my modest house's drooping porch, reality hit me hard. This was a new beginning for me. My mother had written off this dismantled edifice as a hallucination and a shock. Observing it in the intense morning light, doubt began to creep in. Had I done something terribly wrong? Was I really sacrificing my family for a structure that couldn't even keep the rain out at the moment? It seemed very fitting that my phone had died overnight. I made a decision that left me completely alone. I searched for the emergency pack in my trunk. For breakfast, I always found a glass of water and a granola bar. An ancient pickup truck slowed down the road and then turned into my driveway while I was chewing the dry bar on the bonnet of my car. A man in overalls and with gray hair came out and looked at me with amicable interest. "Good morning." He dialed. "I assume you are the new owner." I nodded suddenly, realizing that my face was soiled with tears and my clothing were rumpled. "Wilson Amanda," I said as I approached him to shake his hand. "Howell Frank," he said. "About a quarter of a mile away is where I reside. I thought I'd see if everything was okay because I saw your car here early. I'm just hanging out in my new place," I said, attempting to sound like someone who was not sleeping in her car after being rejected by her family and who had her life together. Frank looked from me to the house and back again. "I assume you have huge plans for the old Mercer place." "Mercer?" "Before he went away, Tom Mercer owned this house for about 40 years, I asked. "Well done, guy." Until his health faltered, he kept the home nice. With a trace of melancholy, Frank looked about the house. "It's a shame that it has collapsed in recent years." I felt a little more upright after learning that the house had formerly been a cherished residence. "I'm going to restore it," I stated with more confidence than I felt. "I'll bring it back, but it will take time." Frank gave a nod of approval. "That's good to hear. Do you need assistance today?" "In the vehicle, I have some tools." "That's easy." Offer of aid from a stranger broke through the residual shell of my composure. To my shame, instead of being put off, I started crying. Frank simply waited patiently as I composed myself. "Sorry I did it at last. This night has been difficult." "There are plenty of those in life," he remarked plainly. "The offer is still valid today." I was able to see the entire outside of the house when Frank helped me clean the overgrown yard. We worked together to remove years' worth of accumulated garbage from the shed behind the home, and he brought over his chainsaw to cut down a dead tree that was perilously close to the roof. Frank introduced me to 2 other neighbors who came by while we were working, because they had heard about this city girl renovating the Mercer property. By the afternoon, I had met Miguel, a contractor from the next town over, who offered to inspect my roof the next weekend, and Diane, who owned the neighborhood hardware shop and promised me a neighbor discount. "Millfield." We paused on the porch steps, sipping lemonade Diane had brought over, and Frank said that it's little, but people watch out for one another. The majority of us have known one another for our whole lives. In my apartment complex, I acknowledged that it's not like Chicago. I hardly recognize the names of my neighbors. Frank shook his head and stated that's no way to live. Humans require a sense of community. The word community resonated. I've always believed that my family is the only significant community I have. That link had been broken now, but here I was with strangers eager to lend a hand just because I had joined their group. I settled into a renovation rhythm over the course of the following few weekends. Instead of sleeping in my car, I upgrade to a small tent I bought and travel to Millfield after work on Friday. On Saturday and Sunday, I work from sunrise to sunset before returning to Chicago. The roof was the first big project I worked on. Miguel brought along his nephew, who was also a construction worker, and the two of them showed me how to correctly lay shingles, install new plywood sheathing, and locate and replace damaged rafters. As I worked next to them, I gained knowledge by using my gentle office hands, which soon developed calluses, and my pale complexion, which was tanning in the spring sun. It comes naturally to you. After I was able to properly install a part of shingles on my own, Miguel's nephew Luis informed me, "A roof is not typically the first renovation project that most people take on." "There's not much of a choice," I said. "Nothing can be done inside unless the house is weatherproof." The physical work was healing. Every nail I pounded seemed to ease some of the hurt caused by my family's rejection. I felt as though I was taking out a poisonous fragment of my past with every rotten board I replaced. I slept well in my tent at night after a long day of work, too sleepy even to check my phone for the missed calls and messages that had first poured in from Jessica, but noticeably not from my parents. My friends from Chicago, who were worried about my emotional state and abrupt weekend disappearances, finally insisted on seeing Rachel and her fiancé. One Saturday, David took a car out with additional tools and lunch. After showing me around the property and getting to know some of my new neighbors, Rachel stated, "Okay, I get it now. There's a positive vibe here, and your progress is amazing." She was correct. Within a couple of weekends, the change on the outside was already apparent. The sagging roof was gone. After clearing the yard, I began replacing the damaged windows with energy-efficient ones that Diane had arranged for me to purchase at a discounted price. "How is your family situation?" As we ate sandwiches on the recently reinforced porch, David asked. I gazed at the creek that ran alongside my land. My parents are radio silent. Jessica continues texting, alternating between angry and guilty texts. "Has she attended her retreat?" Rachel inquired. "Yes. The entire cost was covered by my parents." I made an effort not to sound resentful. With messages about living authentically and letting go of harmful relationships, she has shared over 50 Instagram pictures of yoga poses and juice cleanses. "Whoa!" David stated. "It's ironic. Brand hypocrisy. I recommended everything said above." Rachel concurred. "But have a look at what you managed to do while she was receiving expensive massages. You're actually creating stuff." She was correct. I had been discovering my strengths at Millfield, while Jessica had been discovering herself at Serenity Springs. I had acquired the skills necessary to rebuild a roof, fix window frames, and reinforce floor joists. As an alternative to replacing the entire septic system, I had begun investigating composting toilets and making sketches for the kitchen renovation. More significantly, I had started establishing relationships with the people of Millfield. At a town council meeting, I was greeted cordially by a number of the locals. I had helped out at the neighborhood park's cleanup day. I had even taken in a stray cat that had been prowling around my property and named him Thomas after the original owner of the house. As spring gave way to summer, I became aware of a significant shift in myself. Though it no longer dominated my thoughts, the initial hurt of my family's rejection was still present. Rather, I found myself thinking about the future, making plans for upgrades, and picturing how I would set up the furnishings in every area, deciding which fruit trees to place along the boundary of the land. I discovered I hadn't looked at Jessica's social media in days one evening while I was sitting on my porch and watching fireflies appear over the area beyond a yard. I hadn't gone through my texts nervously expecting my parents to apologize. When I considered establishing boundaries, I hadn't experienced that well-known twist of guilt. Rather, I felt content and proud of my own development, as well as the house's tangible advancement. I was living completely on my terms for the first time in my life, evaluating my value based on my own criteria rather than those of my family. Even though my house was still far from complete, I was coming full in a way I had never experienced before. 3 months after our breakup, Jessica unexpectedly texted me. "This Sunday, Mom and Dad would like to see you for supper. Come please. You are missed." I gazed at the message for a while, feeling a range of conflicting emotions. I wanted desperately to mend the familial ties. Another half was afraid of reverting to dysfunctional old habits. I spoke with Rachel first, and she reminded me that I could always leave if things didn't work out. I nodded nervously. I was parked outside my parents' house on Sunday night, clutching the steering wheel and encouraging myself. You've gained strength. You have limits. You lead a life. On your own terms, you are building. I felt a strong sense of nostalgia as soon as I went through the door, surrounded by the sound of Dad's favorite jazz station and the familiar fragrance of Mom's cooking. It seemed for a while that nothing had changed. Then I met Jessica, and everything returned to normal. 3 months ago, she didn't look quite as good. She wore a flowing white caftan with several crystal necklaces, and her hair was golden blonde with purple accents today. She hurried over to me, her arms spread wide. "Amanda, I'm so happy you arrived." She wrapped me in an embrace that had a patchouli and herbal scent to it. "We need to catch up on a lot of things." Mom came out of the kitchen, using her apron to wipe her hands. It was impossible to discern her face, something that might have been regret mixed with discomfort. "Adamantly," she said. "You appear to be in good health." "I like living in the country." With equal formality, I answered. Dad came in from the living room and acknowledged with a nod. He said, "Good to see you," which was more than I had anticipated. It was a peculiar dinner. We were seated at the same table where we had had our most recent violent altercation. Now, as though negotiating a minefield, cautiously navigating insignificant speech. The rising cost of food, a cousin's new baby, and the weather. Nobody brought up my house. Nobody brought up Mom's. To us, you are dead. Proclamation. It became difficult to breathe around the elephant in the room as it became so big. My favorite lemon pie was the last dessert my mother served. Obviously, a sacrifice for peace. Jessica was at her breaking point. She exploded, "I have to tell you about the retreat." Amanda, it changed my life. Genuinely revolutionary. I made connections with my true self that I never would have imagined. I took a tiny taste of pie and said neutrally, "That's great." I was able to let go of a lot of limiting ideas and ancestral traumas thanks to the practitioners there. We practiced past life regressions, sound baths, cacao ceremonies, and breathwork. It sounds thorough. Using the same phrase that Dad had used when Jessica initially explained the retreat, I interrupted. Yes, it was. And the populace. I formed such amazing relationships. There was a former tech executive who now serves as a spiritual advisor to celebrities and a San Francisco venture financier who funds wellness firms. Dad and Mom looked at each other. Since her return, Jessica has been incredibly focused. "Tell Amanda about your new business strategy," Mom remarked with pride. Jessica's numerous crystal necklaces clattered when she sat up straight in her chair. "I'm starting a wellness coaching business of my own." Genuineness abounds in Jessica Wilson. I'll be providing courses, one-on-one coaching sessions, and eventually my own retreats. Well done. Sincerely hoping that this endeavor would be more successful than her other ones, I said. "Have you begun to take on clients?" Jessica's expression flickered uncertainly. "Right now, I'm in the setup stage, developing my programs, making my website, and designing the aesthetics of my brand. The business coach I work with focuses on wellness businesses." It sounds pricey. Before I could stop myself, I watched. There was an awkward silence across the table. Dad eventually echoed his earlier argument of the retreat and stated, "It's an investment in her future." Mom continued trying to be diplomatic. "Just like your house project." Speaking of which, Jessica brightly stated, obviously attempting to shift the conversation. "How is that going? Have you already fixed it?" Instead of being offended, her tone seemed condescending, as though she thought I would have given up on the idea by now. I was filled with pride. "It's progressing quite nicely." I responded by showing them pictures on my phone. The roof has been entirely renovated. Every window has been changed. I've begun renovating the kitchen, and the bathroom is operational. I looked at pictures that showed the makeover, the new steps on the front porch, the freshly painted facade, the yard that had been cleared and groomed, and the newly planted flower beds. "Did you do all of this yourself?" He was looking at a before and after photo of the living room when I inquired, seeming really impressed. "The majority of the labor has been done by me, but my neighbors have helped with the specialist tasks." Reluctantly, Mom acknowledged that it does look lovely. However, it's still quite little and far from Chicago, so it's ideal for me. I replied plainly, and my company and I have worked out a partially remote work arrangement. Beginning next month, I will only have to be in the office 2 days a week. They were obviously taken aback by this news. Any change would normally have raised concerns because my career had always been the one area where I had some parental acceptance. Is that sage? Dad inquired. Opportunities for progress may be restricted by remote employment situations. I've given it some thought. I reassured him that my supervisor is encouraging and that my performance stats are outstanding. The arrangement has, if anything, increased my productivity, considering that I don't commute 5 days a week. Jessica had been remarkably silent while I showed her the pictures of the house. Now she carefully placed her fork down. Well, Amanda, I'm glad things are going well for you. Both of our new endeavors should be celebrated. She raised a glass of water and a toast to fresh starts. As we all clinked glasses, I briefly gave myself permission to think that we would be able to create a more positive family dynamic. Then Jessica added, maybe the worst was over. Speaking of fresh starts, I would like your opinion on a matter. Amanda, you have a knack for practical details and arithmetic. I instantly had warning signs in my mind. What sort of input? Well, some initial funding is needed to start a coaching firm. In order to cover website creation, marketing program materials, a retreat, a scouting trip, and living expenses, while I expand my clientele, my business coach advises having at least $15,000 for the first 6 months. My parents have been quite giving, and I carefully put down my fork. Jessica went on. They have paid my rent for the next 3 months and put $5,000 toward company expenditures, but I still need roughly $10,000, Jessica. Slowly I said, tell me please that you are not requesting money from me at this time. Not all of it, she explained fast. Perhaps only $3,000. You might think of it as a family business investment. I would repay you with interest, as soon as I'm profitable. My parents studiously avoided making eye contact as I glanced at them. Did you anticipate this question from her? Mom shifted her napkin around. We believed that could be a nice method for you two to get back on your feet. Sort of a collaboration, a partnership. I said it again. I give Jessica money for a business that has no customers, no history, and no clear plan other than wellness coaching, which she has been interested in for 3 months. Jessica made defensive corrections for months. Additionally, I've earned credentials from a 1-week retreat and a weekend course. That hardly qualifies you to charge people for life advice, as I pointed out. You don't trust me, Jessica said. Her eyes were filled with tears. Exactly on time. You haven't. It's unfair, I retorted. I've helped you through several changes in your career. I've admired your hobbies and heard about your plans. The main problem here seems to be that I haven't been funding them lately. Dad said in a threatening tone, Amanda, your sister is attempting to construct something significant. I am too. I cried out. I'm actually using my own hands to construct a house. Why is my house less worthy of family support than her business idea because family members support one another? You seem to have forgotten the edge that returned to her voice when she said, Mom, family members support one another. I said it again. An intriguing idea. Let's discuss that. Did family support me when I required a new gearbox for my car last year and had to eat 8 ramen a month to pay for it while working 3 jobs to pay for college? Did my family support me when I reached professional milestones? Did my family honor me the same way they honored Jessica's every whim? Mom objected that it wasn't the same. You've always taken care of yourself. You've never need our assistance. I responded quietly. Everyone needs help sometimes. Everyone requires encouragement and acknowledgement. This family just taught me early on not to expect it. Unless Jessica was my name. That is really unjust. Jessica sobbed. You are portraying me as a parasite of some sort. You said I'm stating facts. How much have your parents given you over the past 5 years? How often have they helped you out when you were having financial difficulties? They have funded how many career changes we provide for both of our girls. Dad had a different idea. I recognized that you provide Jessica with both emotional and financial support. By expecting me to be the responsible one, who never needs anything and is always willing to assist clean up messes, usually Jessica's messes, you show your support for me. Jessica started, if you're still upset about the retreat. I interrupted. This isn't about the retreat. This is about being treated unfairly for a lifetime. This is about my mother telling me outright that I was dead to them since I choose to put money into myself rather than you. This concerns being asked to return for a family meal and then being charged for it once more. We didn't invite you for that reason. Mom objected, but her eyes changed in a guilty way. Isn't it because we've avoided talking about what happened 3 months ago throughout the entire meal, nobody has shown regret for rejecting me? That was painful, and no one has admitted it. Instead, we've set up another request for me to pay for Jessica's most recent whim while pretending everything is fine. Jessica argued that it wasn't a whim. This is what I'm meant to do. Was teaching yoga blogging about food or organizing events your calling? I gave a head shake. Jessica, I want to have faith in you. I do. I can't, however, keep burning myself alive to keep you warm. Suddenly convinced that this attempt at reconciliation had been doomed from the beginning, I got up. You won't get any money from me for your company. Not $3, not $300, and not $3,000. Build it yourself to demonstrate that this isn't just another ephemeral stage. Be committed, work hard, and don't rely on others to pay for it. You have no right to talk to your sister in that manner. The uneasy calm was broken when Mom snapped. What specifically have you done, considering everything we've done to attempt to repair this family? I inquired. Asked for money from me by inviting me to supper. Made a bribe of my favorite dessert. Those aren't activities that foster relationships. They're tricks. Dad shook his head and remarked, You've changed. Family loyalty used to make sense to you. I've remained the same. I corrected him. I just no longer accept the role that has been given to me. Yes, I am aware of the importance of family loyalty. It ought to be reciprocal. It shouldn't be contingent on me providing financial assistance or other irrational demands. I grabbed my phone and handbag. I had to leave. I appreciate the dinner. That's it then? Bitterly, Jessica inquired. Again, you're putting your small house project ahead of your family. I gave her a look. I stared at her with a peculiar sense of detachment and compassion. I'm putting my financial stability and emotional well-being ahead of an unpleasant family dynamic. Mom said, There's a difference if you walk out that door. There won't be another invitation. At the threshold, I stopped. I felt like I was seeing things again. What's interesting, it was terrible the last time you handed me that ultimatum. It seems liberating this time. I became aware that something significant had changed inside of me as I was leaving the house where I grew up. There was no longer the remorse that had always followed every act of self-preservation. It was replaced by a calm sense of assurance that despite what others might think, I had made the proper choice for myself. I felt like I had finally come home to myself when I was truly free of the need for my family's approval for the first time in my life. I stood in the middle of my finished living room, 6 months after the unsuccessful reconciliation dinner, gently turning to see the change. What had been a run-down shell was now a bright, comfortable house that showed my practical side, as well as my newly discovered self-assurance in my creative abilities. Through new windows, the old hardwood flooring shone in the afternoon sun after being meticulously polished and refurbished over several weekends. Once decaying and damaged by water, the walls were now painted a soft cream that made the tiny room seem brighter. Frank had assisted me in restoring the exposed beams on the ceiling, which gave the space personality and the appearance of height. My furniture consisted of a variety of upcycled items, thrift store finds, and a few well-timed new purchases. The sofa, a tiny wood burner that would keep the room warm during the cold winters in rural Illinois, was my biggest purchase. One wall was already packed with bookshelves that held my assortment of literature, accounting references, and recently purchased home renovation manuals. The kitchen was small but functional, with white cabinets, butcher block worktops, and open storage that made the most of the available space. It was viewable through an archway that I had extended during renovations. My vegetable garden, which is currently producing its first fall harvest, was seen from a farmhouse sink that was placed beneath the window. Once a nightmare of broken fixtures and enigmatic stains, the bathroom was now an unexpectedly opulent haven. I refurbished a clawfoot tub that I had discovered at a scrapyard. Despite its small size, the bedroom's bed-window alcove and basic plot form made it feel like a haven. The change was just as striking. To make room for outside dining and a porch swing, the sagging porch had been restored and expanded to encircle two sides of the home. Once unkempt and covered with trash, the yard now had raised vegetable beds, tidy landscaping, and baby fruit trees that will grow into mature trees in the years to come. I had spent just under $18,000 on improvements overall, which was a little above my initial budget, but still incredibly cheap for a completely renovated house. More significantly, I was the sole owner. No mortgage. Nothing. Just moderate utility and property taxes. As I continued to admire our house, my now plump orange cat Thomas rubbed against my legs. I bent to scratch behind his ears and said, "We did it, buddy." The doorbell rang, not bad for a shed in the woods. Since I had only installed it the week before, it was still novel. When I answered the door, Rachel and David were standing there with food bags and housewarming presents in their arms. Rachel gave me a tight hug and said, "Welcome to the official housewarming party," before taking a step back to survey the area. "Amanda, it's breathtakingly gorgeous. It's unbelievable that this is the identical location that we visited half a year ago. The change is amazing," David concurred, putting a plant in a pot beside the door. "And I'm not just referring to the house either." I understood his meaning. The Amanda who now stood tall in her own house was a different person than the one who had bought this property a year earlier. I was physically altered by the renovation process. My once soft office body has become powerful and slender. Even as fall drew near, my skin remained tanned. The internal shifts, however, were far more significant. More people showed up throughout the afternoon. During my nightly renovation journey, I made acquaintances with a number of Millfield people, including Frank and his wife, Eleanor Miguel and his family, and Diane from the hardware shop. There was a lot of conversation, laughter, and the distinct warmth of community in my tiny home. We were huddled around the backyard fire pit that I had constructed. To Amanda, who saw possibilities where others saw issues, Frank raised his glass and toasted to new beginnings. And the fact that sometimes it takes new perspectives to realize the worth and things we've missed. Diane joined his mail by adding her glass. "It's fortunate that Field has you." Unexpectedly, I blinked back tears. I was moved by their sincere love. This was the potential of family, unconditionally supportive, without competition proud, linked without any alteration. After my visitors had left, I sat by myself on my porch swing and watched the fireflies dance across the field. There was an SMS notification buzzing on my phone. It came from Jessica, my birth family's first communication in almost 4 months. "I saw pictures of your house on Instagram. It looks great. I hope all is okay with you." I gazed at the message, taken aback by its content and by my own feelings. There was only a slight interest in what had made her reach out, not bitterness or fury. After giving it some thought, I said, "Thank you. I'm doing great. I hope so as well." She answered right away, "It's a slow business. Briefly returned to live with mom and dad. It's tense." I could see the family issue taking up all of my attention. Jessica and my parents would have to deal with their own broken relationship. "That's unfortunate to hear." Despite everything, I replied back with sincerity. I didn't want them to be unhappy. As Jessica was writing in her next message, threats came and went, and then reappeared. "You mentioned building something yourself, and I've been considering it. Do you think we could have a conversation sometime? It has nothing to do with money. Simply speak." I gave this request great thought. There was no longer any drama in my family ties, and my life had acquired a calm pace. Did I want to interfere with that? However, personal development went beyond simply severing relationships. When feasible, it also involved setting up sound boundaries. I would be amenable to that. Finally, I responded on Riverton's neutral ground coffee shop. Halfway between Millfield and my parents' residence was a bigger town called Riverton. That's effective. "Thank you." I put my phone away and turned back to the sound of my porch swing creaking and the firefly. It was unclear if re-establishing contact with Jessica would result in anything positive, but I was going into it with strength rather than duty. The most important development of my adult life had been sparked by my choice to buy this house, this shed in the woods, as my mother had mockingly referred to it. In addition to acquiring useful skills and a useful asset, I also learned important facts about relationships and myself that completely altered my viewpoint. I discovered that true security comes from communal connectedness and self-sufficiency rather than from other people's approbation. I learned that advocating for myself wasn't selfish, rather, it was essential to real connections. I've discovered that a chosen family can occasionally have greater significance than biological ties. Above all, I had come to the realization that recognition alone is not enough to break dangerous practices. It requires tangible action and the guts to confront resistance from people who are used to your obedience. Once a last-ditch gamble, my modest cottage had evolved into a tangible representation of these teachings. Every painted wall, every repaired board, every thoughtfully selected fixture symbolized a choice to appreciate myself enough to design the life I desired, rather than the one that other people expected me to lead. I experienced a profound sense of contentment that was unrelated to perfection as darkness descended on my small area of rural Illinois. I didn't have an ideal life. My connections weren't flawless. Even with all the upgrades, there were still oddities and unfinished projects in my house. It was mine, though, everything. In a sense, the successes and setbacks, the isolation and community, the boundaries and relationships are all mine. In my former life, nothing ever had. As he settled in for the evening, Thomas leaped onto my lap and purred loudly. As the final firefly vanished into the night and the first stars emerged above, I scratched beneath his chin. "Friend, we made the proper decision," I muttered. "This is just where we should be. Have you ever had to choose between your personal wants and your family's expectations? Please share your stories in the comments section below. Even when people don't understand, remember that sometimes putting your own health first is the bravest thing you can do. In order to learn more about my continuous path of self-discovery and home restoration, please like and subscribe if this story spoke to you. Additionally, share this video with anybody you know who might benefit from hearing this message. I appreciate you being a part of my community of choice, and don't forget the home you constructed for yourself. It is always worth the effort, whether it is literal or symbolic.